Last week, Mr. Mersch traveled to Lithuania to preside over the activation of a German tank brigade that could serve as a bulwark against any Russian invasion through neighboring Belarus, which is seen as a potential staging ground for military action by Moscow. Hundreds of Lithuanians turned Vilnius's famous cathedral square into something akin to a militaristic county fair last week to celebrate the activation of the new brigade. Now, this is really interesting. They had a militaristic fair in Vilnius, or Vilnius, which is the capital city of Lithuania. That is surreal. But we are seeing militarism coming back. That's what we're seeing. So it says here, historic change. So it says here, hold on. A historic change of countries. Okay, now check this out. I'll read this part again. Hundreds of Lithuanians turned Vilnius's famous cathedral square into something akin to a militaristic county fair last week to celebrate the activation of the new brigade, a historic change for a country that the Nazis brutally occupied 8 decades ago. So the Germans used to control Lithuania when they were the Nazis. When Germany was under the Nazis, it controlled Lithuania. It also controlled Poland. And it brutalized these countries. And now you're seeing the Germans coming back to Lithuania to militarily occupy it. That's what's happening. Believe me, this is going to be an occupation, because the Lithuanians, they can't defend themselves by themselves. They can't. Right? They're hopeless without help, without external help. So Germany comes along and says, yeah, we're going to park our military in Lithuania. And we're going to put at least 5,000 soldiers in Lithuania. That means Lithuania is dependent on Germany. That means Lithuania is under German control. And I've said this before. There's no such thing as weak independent countries. They don't exist. They just don't. You can't be a weak country and independent. If you are a weak country, you are dependent on another country. There's no such thing as weak independent countries. The only independent countries are countries that are strong. And so Lithuania is dependent on Germany. That means it's under German control. And I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that eventually the Lithuanian military is just going to be integrated into the German military. How do I know this? Because the Germans want to do this. The Germans want to create a military power wherein the European militaries are going to be under the control or under the command of the German military. We've already seen this with the Dutch military, which is virtually integrated with the German armed forces. You can look this up. The Dutch military and the German armed forces. They're one and the same now. So the precedent has already been established, and it's only going to get bigger from here. The Germany is only going to continue to widen its militaristic integration of European militaries into the German military. I also want to add that when Lithuania was under Nazi control, there were a lot of Lithuanians who were Nazis themselves. This whole idea that, Lithuania was just a victim is not exactly true, not entirely true. There were Lithuanian Nazis, and there was a Lithuanian fascist or far-right paramilitary organization called the Lithuanian Activist Front, or the LAF. Lithuanian Activist Front was a proxy of the German armed forces, and the whole point of the Lithuanian Activist Front was to help the SS basically take control over it was basically to terrorize the Polish population that was living in the Vilnius region within Lithuania. So after World War I, Vilnius got under the possession of Poland, and it was part of Poland. But there were a lot of Lithuanian nationalists who wanted to have the Vilnius region go back to Lithuanian possession. So what the Germans did was they recruited a lot of Lithuanian nationalists they brought them over to Germany, where they trained them in paramilitary tactics. Then, during the Second World War, the Germans unleashed these nationalists under the umbrella organization of the LAF, or the Lithuanian Activist Front, and the LAF began to terrorize the Polish population in Vilnius. By terrorize, I mean they were doing mass murder and rapes for weeks, and they murdered thousands of people, and it was horrific. It was like a little Baltic Rwanda, if you will. And this was something that was facilitated by the Germans, and the massacres were being done by Lithuanians, and the rapes were being done by Lithuanians. So when we talk about Lithuania, I notice that there is this common pattern of just treating Lithuania as this little victim country. Lithuania did its share of atrocities, and it did its share of atrocities on behalf of the Germans. And there aren't a whole lot of Lithuanians talking about these atrocities. And so when I see Germany going back to Lithuania, I'm not just reminded of the former military power of Germany, but I'm also reminded of the past atrocities that Lithuanians did as proxies of the Germans. Could that happen again? Yes, it actually could happen again, because in Vilnius, during the Second World War, you had a Polish population in Vilnius. Those Poles were butchered by the Lithuanians because the Germans hated the Poles, and the Lithuanians hated the Poles because they wanted Vilnius back, etc., etc. Well, in all three of the Baltic countries, you have a Russian minority. So Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, all three of these countries have Russian minorities. All three of these Russian minorities feel discriminated against. So if the Germans take over Lithuania, and they want to, and let's say Germany enters a serious war with the Russians, they're going to say, hey, Lithuania, you have a Russian minority, and this Russian minority is pro-Russia. They're a threat. So what you did to the Poles in Vilnius during the Second World War, we want you to do it again to the Russians. Lithuania also has another ethnic minority living within its borders, and that is the Polish ethnic minority. The Polish ethnic minority, from what I have read, is different from much of the Poles who live in Poland, in the sense that the Polish ethnic minority living in Lithuania are pro-Russia. The reason why the Polish ethnic minority living in Lithuania are pro-Russia is because of what happened in World War II, with the Russians saving the Poles from the Nazis. Secondly, during the Cold War, the Russians backed the Polish separatists who were living within Lithuania. This happened during the Cold War, although this attempt or this plan to do a revolt by the Poles, which was backed by the Russians or the Soviets, failed. So that Polish ethnic minority is sympathetic to Russia. From what I read, this ethnic Polish minority enjoys watching Russian media. So they receive the ire of the Lithuanian Nationalist. So if there is a severe war between the Germans and the Russians, and Lithuania is involved, the Germans are going to tell the Lithuanians, and I can see this happening. I can see happening. The Germans telling the Lithuanians, hey, Lithuania, you have a Russian minority living within your borders, yes? You have a Polish ethnic minority living within your borders, yes? Both of these ethnic populations, these minority populations, are pro-Russia. We are in a war with Russia. Therefore, those minorities are a threat. So what you did to the Poles in the past, you can do to the Poles again. And you can do the same thing to the Russians. And you could have pogroms. You could have massacres. And I can see this happening. So when I look at what's happening today, I don't just say, oh, joy, look, oh, the Germans are going to stand up and the Lithuanians are going to stand up against evil Putler, Putin. When I look at what's happening today, I see what's happening today in light of the past. And if you think the past is forgotten, you're a fool. Because even when you look And for example, Latvia. The Latvians have as a national hero Herbert Kukers, who was a Latvian SS member who was also a rapist and a mass murderer. And you have Latvian nationalists who defend this man. So it's not just that I remember the past, but I also understand that they are evil people today who also remember the past, and they want to repeat the evils of the past. So it says here, throughout the years of the Cold War, Germany could rely on our allies standing by our side at an emergency. Today we are here. Now this is interesting. This is what Friedrich Merz said in the speech to mark the beginning of Germany's first inter-European deployment in its history since the Second World War. Throughout the years of the Cold War, Germany could rely on our allies, the US, standing by our side at any emergency. Today, we are here, the ones who have a duty. So what is Mr. Merz implying here? What he is implying is we used to be able to rely on the US, but we can't rely on them anymore. So that's why us Germans have to take the rein. We have to take up the helm. We have to get on the driver's seat, and we have to grab Europe's destiny by the horns, and we have to lead our own fate. This is what he's saying. Again, what we are seeing is the incremental process of what I have been talking about since 2016, and that is Germany's militarist revival. This is what we're seeing. This is what we're witnessing. And you're seeing it. So first it's going to be 700, then it's going to be 1,000, then it's going to be 5,000. It's probably going to be more eventually. They're probably going to put more than 5,000. World War III. Yeah, exactly. That's what this is. Mr. Merz has made military spending a cornerstone of his agenda, taking out huge loans to finance his efforts to rebuild an aging military starved for resources. During his inaugural speech to lawmakers this month, Mr. Merz vowed to make Germany's army the strongest conventional military force in Europe, a pledge that he repeated in Vilnius last week. You see? If Germany is going to be... Guys, come on. If Germany is going to be the strongest military force in Europe, then that means Germany is going to revive its Reich. It's going to develop the Fourth Reich. Because if you are the biggest military power on a continent, you control the continent. It's going to be a German Reich. Plain and simple. If you have the biggest guns and you have the most money, you dominate your area. That's how it works. That's why it's putting troops in Lithuania. That's why the Dutch armed forces have been integrated into the German armed forces, because Germany controls Europe. With the exception of, I know America has the ultimate control here, but as far as just Europe goes, Germany is the biggest dog outside of the United States. And what the US is doing is saying, listen, we've occupied you guys long enough. We've controlled you guys since the end of World War II. You guys are now going to handle Europe. And Germany is really going to control Europe. Right now, the US controls Europe. And right now, Germany is still under occupation. But even under occupation, it still has the biggest economy. The US wants to cut the leash that it has around Germany's neck. And when it does that, the Germans are really going to control Europe. And you're going to see the Fourth Reich. I mean, it really is that easy to deduce. Just think about it. If you have the biggest guns and the most money, you have the power. You're the biggest gang in the neighborhood. So it says here, he also wants Germany to step up on the global stage as the region faces a growing threat from Russia, and President Trump pushes for Europe to bear more of the burden for its defense. And this is a phenomenon that we've been witnessing for decades now, or not for decades, but for many years. The US has been pushing the Germans to increase their military spending, and now the Germans are saying, okay, we're going to do it. And when it says he wants to make Germany step up on the global stage, that means making Germany into a world superpower. That's what that means. And let's be real here. Germany is not a weak, poor country. Germany is a very wealthy country, which means it has the means to actually make itself into a superpower. Mr. Merz is set to meet on Wednesday with President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine to discuss, among other things, European aid for the war. So the Germans, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit because there is another article I want to show you guys about this. The Germans are continuing to supply aid to the Ukrainians. The Germans want to make themselves into the biggest supplier of aid. And another thing that the Germans want to do is they want to give the Ukrainians the missile capabilities to launch missiles deep into Russia. And if the Germans grant to the Ukrainians that capacity, that would mean Germany being a direct player, a direct belligerent in the war. Because in order for those missiles to be fired, in order for those missiles to be unleashed, there would have to be German specialists in Ukraine to fire those missiles. So if the Germans grant to the Ukrainians the missile technology and the permission to fire those missiles deep into Russia, that would mean Germany being in Ukraine, firing those missiles from Ukraine. And that would mean Germany becoming a direct belligerent in the war against Russia. That's what that would mean. And the Russians have already warned the Germans, listen, Germany, if you do this, there is going to be a war between the Russians and the Germans. And Sergei Lavrov recently stated that it looks like the Germans are going down the same path that they treaded upon during the Second World War. It's crazy. I wish I was wrong all these years, but I'm afraid I'm not. It says here, before Mr. Merz was sworn in as chancellor, he coordinated a vote to change the country's constitution to decouple military spending from Germany's borrowing limits. Yes. So the Germans basically said, no limits on military spending. No, nothing. And the Germans have always been known as a very thrifty people. Thrifty is not the correct word. Well, yeah, I guess you could say thrifty, but they've always been known as a people who are fixated on saving money and being frugal and not overspending on things. But for the military, they're making an exception. They're saying, nope, all those limits are not going to be imposed when it comes to military spending. Why? Because they want to revive militarism. If there was a German superstate, wouldn't it be some tension due to cultural and historical factors? Yeah, well, exactly. And that's why Sergei Lavrov is hearkening back to World War II. That's why. Because of that history, that historical background. Same thing with Turkey going to war with Armenia. I mean, Turkey invaded Nagorno-Karabakh and took Nagorno-Karabakh through its proxy Azerbaijan. And there's a lot of historical background to that because of the Armenian Genocide. I mean, you see Turkish troops, Turkish Azeri troops beheading Armenians, and that harkens back to what happened back in World War I. And that brings back all that trauma. That revives all that trauma. It brings all that trauma back from the dead, and it's like the game Jumanji. You know, I use this the analogy of Jumanji in one of my last videos. I said that racism is like Jumanji, and you know, in the movie Jumanji, you have this board game that's it's essentially cursed. And so when you start playing the board game, all of a sudden you see animals stampeding through your house, and there's a hunter from the safari who's trying to kill you, and it's a great film. I mean, I never saw the remake with The Rock, but I did see the one with Robin Williams, and it's a great movie. But racism is like Jumanji. In the film Jumanji, people take the board game and they bury it deep under the ground, and if you exhume the board game and you start playing it, the curses come. So with racism, with Nazism, with German militarism, these things have been buried. And they're exhuming, they're unburying, they're bringing up to the surface this old cursed board game. They're Jumanjiing history. But if you look at let's look at the median age of Russia. What's the median age of Russia? 40. So slightly less than that of the Germans. But still, I mean, the Russians also are I'll be honest with you guys, the Russians are a sick society. And by sick, I mean that they have a low birth rate. The Russian birth rate is very low. And so the median age of Russia is 40 years old. Can 40-year-olds fight in the battlefield? Absolutely. Can 40-year-olds be tenacious? Absolutely. But a 40-year-old being on the battlefield is probably not as optimal as a young man who's in his late teens or in his early 20s being on the battlefield. But still, Russia is in the middle of a war, and they've been in a war for years. So just because Germany, the median age of Germany is in the 40s, doesn't mean they can't go to war. Plus, that's also keep in mind that there are literally millions of people in Germany who are in their 20s. There are millions of people in Germany who are in their teens. So could Germany make an army of millions of young men? Yeah, it can. It still has that ability. And let's remember, the population of Germany is probably 86, or it's definitely in the 80 millions range. What is the birth rate of Russia? Birth rate of Russia is 1.42, and looking at the trajectory, it looks like it's continuing to decline. If we look at the birth rate of Germany, the birth rate of Germany is the same as that of Russia, 1.40. See, Russia is 1.42, Germany is 1.46, so it's actually slightly higher than that of the Russians. And you could say, well, that's all the Turks who are living in Germany. And I would say, so what? They're Germanized Turks. They love Ataturk. They love the Armenian Genocide. And they probably hate the Russians as well. So, I mean, they're actually perfect for recruitment. And I could totally see a Turco-Germanic army forming. I mean, the Turks and the Germans today are very strong allies. So I could totally see Turkey and Germany forming a Germano or a Euro-Turkic army or Euro-Turkish army. And I could totally see it being very dangerous. Both Mr. Pistorius and Germany's foreign minister, Johann Wadafool, have recently signaled that Germany is ready to increase spending to up to 3.5% of its economic output on defense and another 1.5% on critical defense infrastructure. Mr. Trump has urged NATO allies to commit 5% of their economic output to military spending. So it says here that Mr. Pistorius, who was criticized for warning that Germany has to be ready for war, has tried to push party colleagues into a Swedish-style draft model in which all young people would be registered, giving recruiters a chance to reach out to individuals with personalized offers. So they're trying to get the young people to join the military. The thing is that that's not going to work if the young people don't have an incentive to join the military. That's why militarism is not just about military spending. Militarism is also about military culture. And you have to have a culture with attractive enough aesthetics to attract young people. And you also have to give a cause that would incentivize or that would encourage young people to join said military. So if you say, well, we're going to fight for international law and democracy, no one gives a shit about that. If you say, we're going to fight for Deutschland, we're going to fight for blood and soil, and if you don't fight, you're going to get raped, your wife's going to get raped, everyone's going to get raped. And they're going to rape her right in front of you. They're going to force you to watch. I mean, if you use that type of brutal propaganda, that is very effective to get people to join the military, especially people who are young and impressionable and their brains are like sponges and they're easy to manipulate. That really does work. It worked during World War I when the Kaiser said these Russian Mongolians are going to destroy our country. Also, like I said before, you have to have an environment that is conducive for Führer. So if you have the environment where people are longing for a leader who's going to fix things, and then they get that leader, and you have a cult of personality, then it's much easier to recruit young people. Young people are going to want to join. Mr. Pistorius, who was criticized for warning that Germany has to be ready for war. Okay, I already read this. Sonke Neitzel, a military historian who has written several books on Germany's military, said that besides staffing shortages, one major problem is that there are too many high-level officers and not enough recruited soldiers to do the actual fighting. So they have all these high-level guys, sergeants and generals, and they got all these types of people. But they don't have enough young people who are actually going to do the battlefield's work, who are actually going to do the fighting. And that's the dilemma that Germany is in. So they're going to have to create a militarist culture with an attractive and marketable aesthetic that's going to attract young people to join. There's also going to have to be some sort of a catastrophe, some sort of a very tense atmosphere that's going to incentivize or that's going to push young people to want to join the military. And then, of course, you just have a regular draft. So it says here that the German armed forces are still a peacekeeping force that is completely overburdened with bureaucracy and whose personal structure needs to be fundamentally changed. Now remember the Weimar Republic. The military was also very weak during the Weimar Republic. But what incentivized a thriving military in Germany? Adolf Hitler, his speaking, the tense instability that was going on in society. All of these factors played a role in getting young people to join the military. And the same thing can happen again. The 45th Tank Brigade that Mr. Merz and Mr. Pistorius activated in Vilnius last week will encompass as many as 4,800 German soldiers once it is at full force in 2027. I'm telling you, mark my words. Write this down. 2027. That year is going to be a crazy year. That is going to be the year of explicit militarism, and possibly to a certain extent, actual conflict, further conflict within Europe. But I'm telling you, 2027 is going to be a crazy ass year. It is going to be a year of immense, in-your-face, explicit militarism. Because every time I read these articles about military boosting, military spending boosting, and all that stuff, that year, 2027, always shows up for some odd reason. And this is the case for the Turkish military, it's the case for the Hungarian military, it's the case for the Chinese military, it's the case for the German military. Lavrov calls German army plans very worrying. So the Germans know that the Russians know, and the Russians are letting everyone know that what the Germans are doing is hearkening back to the evils and to the militarism of World War II. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Wednesday called Germany's plans to build the strongest army in Europe a very worrying development. Many were immediately reminded of the last century when Germany twice became the leading military power and how much trouble that caused, Lavrov said at a security conference in Moscow. Germany, long reluctant to ramp up military spending since World War II, has shifted course in recent years, emerging as one of Ukraine's most steadfast backers. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has also pledged to provide all financial means necessary to modernize Germany's long underfunded armed forces. Berlin recently stationed a 5,000-strong armored brigade in Lithuania, making it the country's first permanent foreign troop deployment since the end of World War II. What do I say about history rhyming? I say history doesn't exactly repeat, but it sure as hell does rhyme. And so the Germans are doing things that rhyme with history. The Kremlin has frequently invoked the Soviet Union's fight against Nazi Germany to rally domestic support for its invasion, etc., etc. Russia and Germany had maintained relatively stable ties before the 2022 invasion, but Berlin has since become one of Kiev's main military and political supporters, a position Merz has vowed to uphold. And if you look at that interest that Germany has with Ukraine, that definitely goes back to the two world wars. World War I, Germany wanted to control Ukraine. Eventually, it backed the Bolshevik Revolution to overthrow the Russian government and to pull Russia out of the war. After the Russians pulled out of the war, there was the infamous Brest-Litovsk conference in Belarus, and the Germans and the Ottomans had a meeting with the Russians, and the Russians said, "Take what you want," and the Germans and the Ottomans carved out the Russian Empire, and the Germans said, "Give us Ukraine." The Germans said, "Give us Latvia," and the Ottomans said, "Give us Armenia." And that's what happened. Well, they didn't get Armenia. The Ottomans did get some. The Ottomans did get some border regions that were a part of the Russian Empire, but that once belonged to the Ottomans. But they did not get the South Caucasus region that we now today call Armenia. They tried to, but they lost in fighting against the Armenians. But the Germans were fixated on getting Ukraine. During World War II, they were fixated on getting Ukraine, and they did. And the Germans took over Poland, and they utilized the Ukrainian minority that was living in Poland they utilized them to butcher the ethnic Poles who were living under German occupation, especially in East Galicia, Lvov and the Volyn region, and 100,000 Polish people were butchered by the German proxies. The Ukrainians were being used as proxies by the Germans. So the Germans had an interest in Ukraine. So they still have an interest in Ukraine. That interest is still there, just like the Ottomans have an interest in Armenia, just like the Ottomans have an interest in the South Caucasus. So these historical facts, these historical realities need to be factored in when looking at these current events. Well, they want Ukraine now, but they wanted Ukraine in World War I. They wanted Ukraine in World War II. So geopolitically speaking, nothing has really changed. And so what we're seeing is this revival in German power, and we should be looking at this revival of German power against the historical background, and that is World War I, World War II, Kaiser's Germany, and also the Third Reich. Check this out. German Chief of Defense orders swift expansion of warfare capabilities. Germany's Chief of Defense, Carsten Breuer, never heard of a German named Carsten Breuer, has ordered the German military to be fully equipped with weapons and other materials by 2029, a document seen by Reuters on Sunday shows. By 2029, Russia may have constituted its forces sufficiently to attack NATO territory, according to estimates by Breuer and other senior military officials at NATO. The document entitled Directive Priorities for the Bolstering of Readiness, which Breuer signed on May 19th, said Germany will meet the goal with the help of funds made available by the loosening of the country's debt brake in March. Last year, sources told Reuters that NATO will request Berlin to at least quadruple its air defenses, ranging from systems with a longer range, such as the Patriot, to short-range systems. Another priority is a capability to launch deep precision strikes. According to the document, effectively hitting targets at a distance of more than 500 kilometers. And this is what I was talking about when I was talking about Germany giving Ukraine missiles that could hit deep within Russia itself. If Germany gives the Ukrainians that technology, and if Germany allows the Ukrainians to fire those missiles, it will be Germany's way of directly entering the conflict, because those missiles cannot be fired without German involvement. It's impossible for the Ukrainians to fire those missiles by themselves. They need Germany to send the specialists to fire those missiles. So if the Germans tell the Ukrainians, okay, you guys can use these German missiles that can that can hit targets 500 kilometers away, that will be Germany entering a war with the Russians. So it says here, another priority, okay, I already read this. Other priorities listed in the document are the swift expansion of Germany's capabilities in electronic warfare and the establishment of a resilient system of offensive and defensive capabilities in space. So they're going to fight over the stars. And it says here that Germany risks becoming a target for Russia for the first time since Hitler. Hell of a headline, I will say. Hell of a headline. So it says here, speaking at a public forum organized by a major German TV station, Merz declared that there are no range limits anymore on how far the Ukrainian military can shoot German weapons into Russia. So Friedrich Merz has said there's going to be no limits on how far Ukrainians can fire missiles. They can 500 kilometers, the Ukrainians can do that. Well, if the Ukrainians are going to do that under the consent of the Germans, that would be Germany entering the conflict against the Russians. And you're going to see the commencement of season 3 of Russo-Germanic Wars. So it says here, for his fellow conservative and head of the Defense Committee of the German Parliament, Thomas Rodekamp, Merz's explicit no to any range restrictions for German weapons is meant to prepare the ground for delivering the powerful Taurus cruise missile to Kiev. So they want to give the Ukrainians the Taurus missile. Taurus missile is a German missile that can hit targets 500 kilometers away. If the Germans give Ukrainians Taurus missiles and say, you can fire those missiles as far as they can strike, that would be Germany entering the war. Because as I said, the Ukrainians are not able to fire those missiles without Germany's help, without German guidance. Taurus's long range of over 500 kilometers was used as an argument against handing it over to Ukraine. So initially, under Olaf Scholz, the Germans said, we're not going to give any Taurus missiles to the Ukrainians, because if we do that, it'll be very dangerous, because those missiles can hit targets 500 kilometers away. And that would be basically a declaration of war against Russia on our part, and that would mean Russian crosshairs looking right at us. Germany right now does not have the strength nor the capacity to actually handle a war with the Russians. It does not. The Germans want to work their way up to that point where they will be able to actually deal with Russia on the battlefield. They're not there yet. So right now, it's just in the realm of talk. Right now, the Germans are in the realm of talking and preparation. But there's eventually going to come a point where the Germans are going to be ready, and they are going to be willing to be in a war against the Russians. And it's going to be, like I said, part 3. It's going to be season 3 of this bullshit. So it says here, the Taurus's long range of over 500 kilometers was used as an argument. Okay, I already read this. Not only can the Taurus strike deep into Russia, or at least try, against Russia's air defenses, and even hit Moscow, it is also a fact, as the head of the German Air Force admitted when feeling unobserved, that the Ukrainian military cannot handle the Taurus on its own. The complexity of its guidance, programming, and launching require that Germans will play a direct role in its use against Russia. So, as I said, if they give the Ukrainians the Taurus missiles and they say you can fire them as far as they can go, that would be Germany entering the conflict. Therefore, even if fired from Ukraine, a Taurus would also be fired by Germany. So it would be Germany firing the Taurus missile into Russia from Ukraine. And that would be a declaration of war by Germany on the Russians. Do the Germans want to do that now? No, obviously not. So right now, the Germans are in the realm of talking and planning and preparing. I do have a theory as to how season 3 is going to commence. I think what's going to happen, I could be wrong, but I think what's going to happen is the AfD is going to become the biggest party in Germany. And they are going to lead a shift in policy when it comes to Russia. They're going to talk about how much they want to be friends with Russia. They're going to be friendlier with the Russians. And they're going to talk about cooperation with Russia. And the world's going to say, this is great. They're peacekeepers. Blessed are the peacemakers. And the AfD is going to have Germany really amplify its military buildup. But they're going to do so under the guise of cooperation with the Russians. Kind of like what Weimar did before World War II. And then the Russians are going to think, oh, wow, these people are on our side. And then eventually, fighting will break out. I don't know how it's going to happen, but it's going to break out. And the Germans are going to say, we fooled you this whole time. We were never your friend. And by that point, the Germans will have boosted their military capabilities to the point where they will be very dangerous. This is my theory as to how things are gonna happen. Russia would simply be at war with Germany. A major Russian defense expert has already appeared on Russia's most popular political show, 60 Minutes, arguing that in this case, Moscow should at a minimum conduct a limited, non-nuclear, but certainly painful missile strike against the Taurus production facilities in Germany. So you already have talk in Russia about actually striking the Germans. I think all of this is just presaging a war between Russia and Germany, and really season 3 of Russo-Germanic wars. So why has Merz sent this odd signal now? Is he one of those hawks? Does he want a direct war with Russia? Probably not, at least not too soon, for Merz is obsessed with the idea of massively remilitarizing Germany. precisely because he argues, and probably even believes, that it is far too weak right now, and this is what I said. At the same time, he knows that this rearmament, with the explicit aim of providing Germany with the strongest army, at least in conventional terms, in Europe, will take years. And this is true. It's going to take years before Germany actually has a serious military force. So that's why I say we are right now in the years of remilitarizing. We are right now in the years of reviving militarism, revamping militaries, trying to incentivize young people to join our respective militaries. That's the era that we're in. The 20s is a decade, not the 1920s, although the 1920s was similar, but in the 2020s, this is a decade of militarism. That's what this is. And I think by 2027, you are going to be seeing the apex of this militarism. In some way or another, you're going to be seeing it. Yeah. So, like the 1920s. So, that's what's happening. And the Germans know this. They know that it's going to take years before they can have serious capabilities to deal with Russia, but that's what they're working towards. And even if the nationalists take over Germany, there's still going to be this build-up to this point that I'm talking about, this boiling point that I'm discussing here. Part of this revival of militarism is going to be the revival of militarist culture, aesthetics, militarist aesthetics, trying to create this meta-political atmosphere where joining the military is cool again. This is what Western countries are working towards, and the Germans are also working towards this. And like I said, there are people out there who think that, well, the nationalists in Germany, the AfD, are anti-war. Nothing could be further from the truth. The AfD are militarists. Yes, they talk about being friendlier with the Russians, but that is all subterfuge. What they want to do is make friends with the Russians. At the same time, they want to make Germany's military very powerful again. And they also want Germany to have nuclear weapons, because they also want to go to war with the Russians. But their idea is to be friendly with the Russians, to become independent of NATO power, and to be powerful enough to really establish a German Reich in Europe. So it says here that Germany's AfD calls for warrior culture revival in military. This is what I was telling you guys about. The revival of German militarist culture. Germany's far-right AfD says the Bundeswehr has become too soft and wants to bring back discipline and a warrior culture inspired by the U.S. military under Trump, slamming progressive reforms as harmful to combat readiness. So this is just like when Adolf Hitler came along and he said, our military is too weak, we got to make it strong again. And as I've said before, America is a trendsetter. It's a trendsetter for the rest of the Western world. America is talking about what? Making its military strong again, incentivizing young people to join the military. This is why they have Pete Hegseth there. And Pete Hegseth is doing the whole Jocko Willink shtick where he's, running with the boys every morning, and he's doing exercise, and he's probably doing jujitsu, and he's the tough guy, you see. And so they want to make it cool to join the military. And this is the trend that America is doing. Well, because America is a trendsetter, other countries are trying to do the same thing. And the AfD wants to do the same thing. But if you have German military culture, what you are talking about is a revival of Prussian military culture. And hearkening back to the militarism of World War I. And the militarism of World War II. That's what you're going to be saying. I know nobody believes me because no one wants to believe that Nazism can come back because, let's be real here, everybody wants to talk about how the colored folks are ruining the world, and nobody wants to talk about how there is a danger behind the idea of reviving European nationalism because they just want to make the dark-skinned people the big boogeymen, and it's just the white folks that are the good guys. So if anyone talks about how, hey, there's a danger behind this whole militarism stuff in the Western world, they don't want to hear that. They just don't want to hear that because they have this idea in their heads that white people are just weakling cucks, and us right-wingers, we are the saviors of Western civilization, and they just don't want to believe that they could actually be the bad guys. It says here, in a heated debate on Wednesday, AfD lawmaker Hannes Gnauk criticized the current state of Germany's military, accusing it of losing its fighting edge and embracing what he described as ideological decay. Gnauk mocked gender-focused roles, eco-friendly infrastructure, and what he referred to as a wellness culture within the Bundeswehr. We need fighters, not CEOs, with gender advisors. Men and women who can lead, fight, and defend our country, the fatherland. Okay, I had to add that one in there. AfD's stance closely mirrors that of U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth under President Trump, who has rolled back diversity programs and pledged to restore a warrior ethos. Now, listen, American militarist culture can be bad, but American militarist culture is about what? You know, going back to the military, hoorah, America. And that can be bad. That can be very dangerous. I don't like it. I do not like it at all. But when you get into German militarism, remember the history. Just remember the history. I know you guys are history buffs, so you guys know what I'm talking about. The only good thing about the Hegseth is the Crusader tattoo. No, I would say that's one of the worst things about him, because he wants to Deus Volt everyone, but then he wants us to worship Israel, and it's very wacky. So he says here, Gnauk also took aim at the Bundeswehr's climate-conscious renovations, calling them an example of misguided priorities. Climate protection instead of combat readiness? That's madness! He criticized modern troop accommodations as too comfortable, claiming that soldiers now live like hotel guests rather than warriors. They need the weapons, vehicles, and tight-knit units, not personal rooms with Wi-Fi. Yeah. Now the target, the largest. Now, a lot of people would see this and think, oh, this is so good. This is amazing. This is awesome, guys. It's so great. They're not being cucks anymore. They're not being weaklings anymore. But it's like, okay, they're not being weaklings anymore. But you guys realize what this is going to lead to, right? You guys realize that once the train is set, there's no going back. It's like the game Jumanji. You bury under the ground. You unearth Jumanji, you start playing the game, and all of a sudden you got curses. Stampedes are running through your house. And this time, people are unearthing the Jumanji of German militarism, and they're playing the game. Don't be surprised if you see a stampede of German soldiers marching in Europe to Erica one day. Just saying. Just saying.